Hi, I'm Rachel's younger brother Phil, and I'm here to pay tribute to Rachel and Dan. Unfortunately, I don't have any dirt on Dan, so I'm going to focus on Rachel. I think you can tell from the slightly smug expression on my face and the slightly nervous one on hers that I've been planning this for quite some time. Today's date has been marked on Rachel's calendar for a few months now, but if you look more closely, you'll see that she also uses that calendar to track how many near-death experiences she has on a daily basis. So I'm calling this The Misadventures of Rachel, because frankly she's been up to her neck in it since the 1970s. If you look at her childhood, she was always very stylish, and of course she was always classy. But there comes a time in life when it dawns on you that you really don't want to be in the same boat as her. And I mean that in a very literal sense. This is a photo of the first time Rachel met my daughter Amelie. Rachel was at flying school in Australia when Amelie was born, so the first time they met was 4 months later when Rachel turned up looking like that. Clearly a flesh-toned plaster is no good if you do a lot of sunbathing. It's an ongoing theme of their relationship that every encounter looks like the video for Ebony and Ivory. But of course it's first impressions that count, and the first time Amelie met her aunt, she had a bandage on her forehead and this bruise on her leg. Fortunately, Rachel provided me with a diagram to explain her injuries. Apparently she'd been on a speedboat. That's her on the left, nowhere near the steering wheel, but close to a hole, which is never a good thing on a boat, when she was unexpectedly catapulted out, thrown 4 feet into the air, and landed on her head. As she said to me at the time, "Everyone thought I was dead." Fortunately, that was just Australian wishful thinking, because within seconds the boat hit another wave, or possibly a shark, at which point Rachel was thrown into the air again, hit the deck, and the second impact revived her. Her leg was badly bruised, but her head was in an even worse state. Not her forehead, but the head of the flying school who owned the boat and didn't want to see it covered in blood. Of course, Rachel's no stranger to causing death by dangerous driving. This is the front headlight of her much-loved Chrysler Deathmobile shortly after mowing down a marsupial in the Australian outback. That's a genuine piece of kangaroo fur welded to the front bumper of her car by the white heat of high-speed impact combined with the adhesive qualities of blood. Fortunately, Rachel was wearing a seatbelt during the crash. Unfortunately, she then took it off to get out of the car and check the damage to her headlights, at which point she tripped over a rock and slammed her knee into the ground. It took a few weeks for that knee to heal, and a few months to get the parts for her car, but having finally got it repaired 6 months later, she took delivery of it and drove off to college, where she entered the car park and ploughed straight into a post. A few weeks after that, she swept up the western coast of Australia to a place called Broome, which she described to me as a bit like Darwin but with water you can swim in. And having waded out to sea, she immediately found herself face to face with a shark. According to the lifeguard who dragged her out of the water, they rarely get shark sightings in those parts, so I think the kangaroos must have told it where to find her. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like to go for a quiet swim in the sea, only to find yourself staring into the ice-cold eyes and gleaming white teeth of a man-eater, but I expect the shark got over it. Of course, it's not just Australia where Rachel's come close to death. She's actually met with disaster all over the world. In 2009, she sent me this informative postcard from Dubai, where she managed to contract swine flu, thereby making her the only person in the known universe who can visit a Muslim country with no pork and promptly catch a pig infection. I wouldn't mind, but she's vegetarian as well. And then there's Las Vegas. Most people who go to Vegas get bitten by the gambling bug. With Rachel, it was the brown recluse spider. Obviously, the best place to find spiders is the web, so this is its Wikipedia page. It looks like this, and if you scroll down, you'll discover that the brown recluse spider is rarely aggressive, and bites from the species are uncommon. Of course, that was before it met Rachel. Fortunately, despite being potentially deadly, the spider, like the bears, sharks, and kangaroos before it, wasn't quite deadly enough to kill her off. But one of the nice things about having a sister who travels the world, apart from the way she can turn my living room from this to this, simply by repacking her suitcase, is the random text messages I get. Such as this one, sent from Egypt in April 2009. I haven't been so scared since the time I built my own road up the side of a mountain. That's a message which requires a little bit of explanation. Back in May 2007, Rachel was in Idaho, which she described to me as a lovely place full of potatoes and mountains. Unfortunately, it's also a place where the weather can change from this to this, and then to this, within a matter of hours. Although it's nice to see that not even the treacherous driving conditions of a blizzard are enough to stop Rachel taking photos at the wheel. Following her sat-nav, she crossed the border into Montana, where she came across a sign which said, "Rough gravel mountain pass road ahead for 25 miles. It's enough to make you stop and think, and fortunately Rachel is a deep thinker. As she said to me at the time, I just thought, how bad could it really be? Well, the answer is this bad, and then this bad. Fortunately, Rachel's not a quitter. She's a Burke. So she inched her way up the side of a mountain in a Chrysler convertible until the temperature dropped below zero, the sun went down, she lost her mobile reception, and the view looked like this. Obviously, turning around would have been dangerous during daylight hours, but Rachel decided to do it at midnight, in the dark, surrounded by bears. So with her car hanging over the cliff, like the bus at the end of the Italian Job, she somehow managed to do a 40-point turn and get back down to sea level, where she was probably attacked by a shark. So that was Montana. But what about Egypt? Well, Rachel has seen a lot of the wonders of the world, and she sent me this message from Cairo. Just been to see the pyramids, and my impression was the same as that of the Sydney Opera House. Smaller than expected, and could do with a good power wash. We don't know what she thought of the camels. But if she was looking for excitement in Egypt, she certainly found it, courtesy of one of the locals. Having arrived at Cairo airport, possibly without her glasses, Rachel walked past the licence taxis and got into the car of a con man pretending to be a cabbie. Before she knew it, he'd locked all the doors, driven off, and was demanding money to let her go. Under those circumstances, most people would have just paid up to save their own life, but not Rachel. For reasons I'm sure she'll be happy to explain, she decided to stick her neck out, take a chance, and utter the following words. "I've got a gun, and I will kill you if I have to." It probably wasn't the first time she'd said that, but it was the most effective. Her impression of an armed killer was so convincing, he shoved her out of the car on a motorway bridge and ran for his life, while she stood there waving her handbag around like an Uzi, before flagging down a passing Arab and persuading him to take her to the hotel. She's basically living a plotline from Grand Theft Auto. Of course, it's not just foreigners that she's had fearing for their lives. I've flown with her. I insisted on being dressed like a flight recorder to help the emergency services find me in the wreckage. Rachel's had a love of planes since childhood, and if you look closely you can see her other love, which is ice cream. I went up with her about 6 years ago in this plane. It's got 2 engines because with her track record you wouldn't want to rely on just one. And it was during one of her final lessons, and by that time she could pretty much do it with her eyes closed. So the instructor decided to test that theory by putting a screen up in front of her. They call it instrument flying. I call it asking for trouble. This is her trying to get radio 2. And the worst bit, however, was when they tried something we call unusual attitudes. Now, I've known Rachel all my life, so I thought I was used to that. But it transpired that in aviation terms, unusual attitudes involves the instructor putting the plane into a position that planes have no right to be in, and then asking Rachel to save our lives. Personally, I wouldn't trust her to save me a piece of cake at my own birthday party, but by some miracle she managed it. And here she is, bringing us back down to earth. I stopped it there just as the instructor adopted the crash position. So having flown all around the world, Rachel finally settled in Wiltshire, the UK's clubbing and party capital. That's the Rotary Club and Conservative Party. Which means I'll never again get a text message like the one she sent me from Australia in 2008. The people in my block have all written to my estate agent to get me evicted because of my party. It's like Big Brother, but they'll all be sorry when I'm an astronaut. She was applying at the time to join the European Space Agency, and I'm proud to say that I helped her fill in the application form. It seemed like the best way to get her off the planet. Sadly, her Australian neighbours had the last laugh as she wasn't selected to go into space. Apparently the aliens wouldn't have her. But in addition to activities that could result in her own death, the death of her loved ones, and the extinction of numerous species, she's also done her best to kill off the British film industry. In November 2011, she sent me this text message. "I'm shooting a film with an actor from Harry Potter." I replied, "Daniel Radcliffe?" To which she responded, "Who?" It transpired that Mr. Robbie Haynes was directing a series of training videos for a chain of care homes and was looking for talented young actors to play the roles of the residents. So when he failed to find any, he called Rachel and offered her 60 quid. She spent most of her fee on petrol to get there. She'd already starred in a number of high-quality home videos, which had showcased her natural talent for method acting. So it was only a small step up into professional movie making. She ended up starring in half a dozen short films, some of which it's only possible to watch through your fingers, but amongst the highlights was this clip.
Mr. Aaron, nice shirt. I like your hair.
Get off! Concerned about the safeguarding issue?
Yes, personally I'm concerned about the safeguarding of poor Mr. Aaron, who's clearly being hassled by a very annoying sister of mine. But fortunately she gets her comeuppance.
Let go! Let go!
It's worth noting that Rachel does all her own stunts, which explains this text message she sent me during production. "My finger has teeth marks in it and hurts after today's episodes." They weren't all action movies, though. But if that makes you feel uncomfortable, try this one.
Be late! See Mom!
There's no better response to that acting performance than to simply put up a big red cross and say no. But fortunately there's one man who didn't say no, and that's Dan. At the end of it all, Rachel and Dan are now married and living in a barn, which is how Mary and Joseph started, so I know they'll live happily ever after. So I'd like to raise one final toast to the bride and groom, Rachel and Dan.